Live for God Studio Productions.
This is Living Power with Dan Hurst.
And Jesus then gives another example. You have heard it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Now let's define a couple of things here. Adultery means literally unfaithfulness. It is and we tend to think of adultery as a physical act, but it's more than that. Adultery is an act of the mind. You don't commit adultery without having the mindset to do so. You don't accidentally commit adultery. Unfaithfulness is an act of the mind that may or may not reveal itself in an action. That's what Jesus is saying. Jesus is saying it's in your head. And that's the issue. It's the lustful intent that becomes the issue. The act, of course, has its own set of consequences. But you will never get to the act if you deal with the mindset. Lustful intent means a desire that leads one out of God's will. Lustful intent is that mindset that leads you out of God's will. It literally means to set the heart upon. That's the meaning of the word. To set the heart upon. And it means taking your eyes off of God and putting your eyes on your own will. A desire for what is in God's will is not wrong. You see, it's not right for me to have lust for my own wife, and I do. It's not wrong for me to have that lustful intent for my wife, because she's my wife. She's God's will for me. And so that's okay. But if you're not my wife, for me to have lustful intent is out of bounds. It's wrong. There is a condition in my mind that needs to be dealt with. And so that's what God is saying. If you've got lustful intent to be used the wrong way, you've got an issue. You've got a problem here. Jesus was teaching that even if you didn't commit the physical act of adultery, what is inside of you that has created that willful act of being mentally unfaithful has already violated God's will for your life. Now, I loved Pastor Brandon's sermon a couple of Sundays ago when he dealt with this very issue. He said, you know, is it wrong to look at a woman and think she's beautiful? No, I look at a lot of women and think they're beautiful. You know, and I don't think that that's wrong. I look at art and I think it's beautiful. You know, I look at geese and think they're ugly. That's a perceptual thing. That is a perceptual thing. But if I look at a woman and begin contemplating, I wonder what it would be like to have a physical relationship with her, that is lustful intent. The law forbidding adultery can't stop you from the reason for the law. That's what Jesus is saying. You've heard it said, don't commit adultery. But I'm telling you, if it's in your mind and you're already considering what would it be like to have a physical relationship with that person, and by the way, this applies to women as well as to men. If you're already thinking that, then you've already committed adultery in your mind, because it's a condition. The law forbidding adultery can't stop you from the reason you need the law. So the issue is, why do you need that law? So how do you solve the issue? Well, Jesus says this. Now, this is really interesting what Jesus says in verse 29. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. Oh, there you go. Okay. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body goes into hell. By the way, I was teaching this to my young people one time down in Florida, and one of them said, well, suppose you sin twice. You can imagine how horrible these two verses have been taught and interpreted over the years. And you've probably heard some awful interpretations. I mean, I've sat in youth camps and heard preachers preach this and think, good Lord, what are you saying? You are so out in left field with what you're saying here. What Jesus was very clearly, yet graphically, teaching was if looking at another person encourages you to lust after that person, quit looking at them. Problem solved. If doing something causes you to sin, quit doing it. That's the clear solution. Hello? That's what the verse says. I'm not saying that it's easy or that it's simple, but the fact is that if you're addicted to heroin, the solution is to stop using heroin. Do you have to do something else to stop using heroin? Whatever it is that you have to do, that's what you do to stop using heroin. If you're addicted to porn, the solution is to stop looking at it. Get rid of it. And, by the way, if that means that you have to get rid of your laptop, get rid of it. If it means you have to pull the plug on your cable, get rid of it. Listen, the difficulty of getting along without your laptop and your cable TV pales in comparison to the consequences of your sin. And then Jesus follows up his comments on the law against adultery with this. It's also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. And folks, I'm here to tell you that whole theologies have been built around these two verses. There are whole groups of people who teach that if you get divorced, you cannot get married again, because that's what the Bible says. That is not what Jesus is saying. That's not what Jesus is teaching here at all. God is a God of grace and mercy. And he's teaching something completely, and don't miss what it is that he's teaching. In that day, divorce was a patriarchal choice. Now, it's man and woman can choose the divorce. But in that day, it was the man who chose divorce. And if a woman was divorced, pretty much the only way that she could support herself, and even more so if she had children, was to get married again. So what Jesus is teaching is that if a man divorces a woman for any reason other than unfaithfulness on the woman's part, he is essentially, and if it's his sexual immorality, then he's a liar. But if the woman was unfaithful and he chooses a divorce, that was acceptable. But if she wasn't unfaithful, if he's choosing other reason, then he is essentially forcing her into a relationship that violates her faithfulness to her husband. She wanted to stay married. She wanted to be faithful to her husband, but he chose to boot her. And so by doing so, he forces her into unfaithfulness, what is essentially like unfaithfulness with another man. This is an example that Jesus is giving, understand. We can get all into this technicality, well, is it a sin, if she gets married? No, Jesus is giving an example of, think about the logic of this, guys. This is what he's saying. If you push a woman away from you and for the wrong reason, and you force her to have to be able to support herself, and the only way that she can do that is by marrying somebody else who can support her, aren't you causing her to have relations with another man? So that's on you as a man. That's what Jesus is saying. You're the one that committed the unfaithfulness, not her. That's what Jesus is teaching. In other words, who's to blame here? You see, there was one of the groups there had this idea that it was like this. Often, if you got a divorce, you had to get a writ of divorce from the priest, which is one of the reasons why Joseph didn't want to put Mary away through divorce, because there was a stigma, obviously, a horrible stigma attached to that. But here she was pregnant, and he wanted to put her away quietly. But divorce was not a quiet thing. The priest would offer a writ of divorce and it would be read publicly. There was another group that believed that all the man had to do, he didn't have to go to the priest, all he had to do was say 3 times, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you, and clap his hands every time he said it. And that was all there was to it. You didn't dare clap your hands if you were at a concert with your wife. That'd get you in trouble every time. What Jesus was saying is, look, there's a Pharisaical law that says a man can clap his hands 3 times, say, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you. But that doesn't solve the problem, does it? In fact, it makes it worse. What Jesus was saying is the real issue is why the divorce. The issue isn't the divorce. Jesus wasn't teaching don't get a divorce here. Sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes it happens. Sometimes people make stupid mistakes as young people. Sometimes lives fall apart. Now, I will be one that I will tell you I don't think incompatibility is grounds for divorce. Just look at me and Marcia. 2 of the most incompatible people in the world. But God's been gracious to us. And we've been married 46 years. 45 of the best years of her life. But anyway, there are reasons that are acceptable, and the Bible does give some reasons that are acceptable for divorce. We're not going to get into that. What we're talking about here is why this law. Jesus was just simply saying, look, you need to understand that the law cannot solve the reason for the law. That's what Jesus was saying. And he came back to say, I am the one that can solve the reason for the law. I'm the one that can heal the marriage. I'm the one that can heal the anger. I'm the one that can fix this. The law can't fix it, but I can.
On behalf of Dan Hurst and the Open Class, we want to thank you for watching. We hope it was a blessing.